When we're on a journey toward calmness, we find that everything is related to everything. And when we find joy in our circumstances and joy in the journey, we can make our way to the center of calmness. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Center of Calmness. Tonight, we're super blessed to have Janice Isaman with us. If I pronounced your name correctly, Janice, welcome.
Thank you.
Did I get your last name correct?
It's Eisman, but that's okay.
Eisman, not Isman. Okay, Eisman. All right, perfect. So glad to have you on today, and you're calling in from Calgary, right?
Yes, where it's cold and wintry already.
Yeah. As we were discussing before the show started, a little bit of snow, right? How many inches so far?
You know, there isn't a ton of accumulation, but what we really have is cold. It is very, very cold. It's like January level cold here right now.
That is crazy. It must be perhaps a function of some of the hurricanes that have passed through earlier this year, perhaps a little bit of early winter effect.
Yeah, I don't know what it's from, but it's definitely a mixed bag because, you know, we start into that hibernation season already.
Right. It's too early, definitely too early to hibernate. There's too much stuff in 2020, I would say, despite COVID and economic turmoil and everything else that we're dealing with that can take us away from calmness. And I think that's a perfect segue into our topic today, where we can maybe cover some of what you do with some of your clients. And as you mentioned, your clients typically come to you with some type of pain, right?
They do. So I'm a movement specialist, which is often something people have never heard of. And what I do is generally work with people's bodies to help them feel better in their body, which is a little bit amorphous because there are people who are competitive athletes and there are people who are super sedentary and haven't moved in 20 or more years. So I basically find out first what somebody wants to do with their body and why. And I get a whole range of answers from I want to compete in an athletic sport to I want to garden. And play with grandchildren, things like that. But essentially what I'm helping people do is find their passion and be able to execute it. And what will generally pull the trigger for people to come see me is back pain, neck pain, hip pain, shoulder pain, you name it, somewhere in their body, something is holding them back. And they recognize that in order to get to that place of real joy and passion in their life, they're going to have to address the bodily function.
I see. And if I might ask, I don't think a lot of folks would just look on Google for movement specialists.
No.
How do folks find their way to you? Do you get a referral from like a doctor or a physical therapist or something like that?
I mostly get referrals from other customers or from massage therapists, chiropractors, acupuncturists, other specialists. In a lot of cases, actually, my clients have been to those specialists. Those are great disciplines, but often the pain will come back, and it will come back for two reasons. One is because we just spend too much time sitting at our desk and exercising kind of bad biomechanics as a result of that. And the second is much deeper, and that is that we have emotional stress on the body. So we have circumstances from the outside world that are adding to this heavy load on our shoulders. And quite often we're not really able to process those. So when I opened my business, I opened an exclusively one-on-one space where I work with people in that private environment. And that creates a really interesting capacity for people to start sharing. So as we're opening up the body, we're releasing compression, out comes stories of things that they want to change in their life. And in this case, we're not necessarily talking about hobbies. We're talking about some really big things: finances, interpersonal relationships, careers, and businesses, and really big things that are kind of sitting on people and literally weighing them down. So when we're decompressing the body, we're also just having casual conversations. You know, I'm not a therapist, but having that person to listen. And quite often I'm one of the first people, if not the very first person that they're sharing this with, which just takes a whole load off of that person's body.
Interesting. So if we just run through the sequence here real quick, an individual is experiencing pain, they might visit a traditional practitioner of some kind, doctor, chiropractor, et cetera, a therapist, perhaps physical therapist. They get the referral to you as a specialist. And then do you start right in with a movement sequence? How do you determine kind of where they're at? Because it sounds like the movement happens first and then the come out afterwards, right?
Correct. Yeah, because not every client is ready, willing, or able to kind of move into that emotional zone. So that's a really great question. From the second that person enters my studio, we do movement. And the first thing that I typically focus on is movement of the hips. That is a really big area of the body. We have 22 muscles across the hips, so there's often a lot to work with there. But it's also the most heavily ligamentous area of the body. So it's meant to kind of stick and be rigid and not move as much. So we start by doing some movement, often on a Pilates machine, just to see how load is transferring through the body. And then, I'm definitely a practitioner who's sharing what I'm seeing with clients. So I'm not kind of just saying, and I immediately start giving them exercises to release that. So that very first session, they walk out of there with, here is some home-based stuff that you can do to make this better right now. And I look at it as a science experiment. That's both for me and for them. They go away, typically come back about a week later, having done the exercises a certain number of times. We can kind of see what impact that had on their body, and then we keep building from there.
I gotcha. Okay. So they begin to work the hips, get some flexibility. And I'm familiar actually with not so much frozen hips, but I'm familiar with hips that don't know how to move, and the process to some extent of starting to release that. And actually, I found it to be, in my own experience, a little bit dangerous, because once you release the degrees of freedom, now you have to know how to control everything. So
yeah, that's right. And so then that's the second layer on a physical level, is we build strength. Because if we take away kind of all that stability that's being caused by something that maybe shouldn't be holding it, but it is, we have to actually reintegrate strength into the right places so that we can actually learn to permanently remove. And a lot of this is caused, quite frankly, by the fact that we sit way, 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 way too much.
I've read a lot about sitting lately, and unfortunately, I still spend quite a bit of time in an office where everything is designed for sitting. Yeah. So I have to detoxify each day. Yeah. I'm actually at a standing desk right now, so that I have found that if I do that, then it provides a little bit of balance.
Exactly. That helps mitigate it. I mean, earlier in the pandemic, I just did some rough and dirty math. This is not a scientific fact, but if we do scientifically have 24 hours a day, if we're sleeping on average 8, that leaves 16. Data does show that most of us aren't taking 10,000 steps, but we're going to assume for this math that we are. That's going to take about an hour and a half. That leaves 14 and a half hours that are unaccounted for. So if we're generous and say, okay, there's time standing at the kitchen washing dishes, or time standing maybe at something like a standing desk, just standing, we can add another hour and a half, 2 hours to that. But that still leaves this tremendously large number. We're standing 10, 12, 14 hours a day. Sitting, sorry. So that's really a biomechanic problem at a certain point, because certain muscles just literally don't know how to function.
Absolutely. And those muscles are huge, right? Or especially around the hip system. And then there's circulatory elements where if you're not moving the hips, then blood doesn't flow the right way, and so on and so
Correct.
forth.
And so what I tell my clients, if we held our hand like this all day, you don't need to put pressure on it. You don't need to squeeze it. Just hold that. Hold that for 10 to 14 hours. You are going to be emotionally annoyed. You are going to be stiff. You are going to feel irritated, and you're not necessarily going to be conscious of that if you do that 7 days a week or 5 days a week, but it's going to have an impact on your emotions. And then those other external stressors that are coming in are really difficult to deal with, because we've used all of our emotional processing capacity on this. And that's essentially what's happening. We have kind of a combination of high levels of external stress, particularly right now, plus our bodies are actually under this constant drip of stress by just sitting in that kind of compressed handhold like that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And that's a great illustration, because none of us in our right mind would even think about doing that. But very version is, if you clench a fist and keep it that way for a week, you probably won't know how to open it up again.
That's also true. Yeah, the musculature that's supposed to be moving there is not going to be as strong or functional. And we know that by hospitals. Here, they actually have signage in the hospital wards, especially the post-surgical wards, explaining what happens after you have been on bed rest, and you lose a tremendous amount of muscle mass and you age quickly. So within the span of 5 to 10 days, you are aging years and years. So this is something that we think is a really extreme statement, but we know that, and it's literally here in the hospitals, they have signs posted there. So we're doing that to our body as we're sitting at our desk working. And it's again, that's not something anybody in their right mind would actually say, oh yeah, I'm degrading my body as I'm doing my job, but we are, and it's having a huge emotional impact on us as well.
And I suppose through the lack of motion and through the lack of circulation, all of that stress that we're taking on while working is just simply being accumulated in those systems that are rigidized, right? Or at least in our minds with no ability to release it.
Yeah, if you've ever watched a horse, when they build up emotion or when they do something that's physically demanding, at the end of that build up, they will literally ground themselves. So they'll fall onto the ground, roll over, perhaps make some sound, and then kind of get up and carry on. And generally speaking, humans actually need that same grounding sensation to say, hey, we've just had this huge stress load, this huge external stressor. We're going to ground ourselves, and then we can kind of carry on. Exercise is actually one of those signals to our body. It's literally the same thing as an animal. We don't think of ourselves as animals, but we are. And so we have a different relationship with the word exercise in our culture. But if we really go back to the idea that we are animals and we need that grounding, we need something for our body to say, hey, that was a lot. Let's get that out. It could be dancing, it could be yoga, there's literally a million kinds of exercise. But what I really specialize in is helping people find that peace where they can just exercise with that joy and pleasure and not have it be sort of a, let's look at the calorie count, let's look at the output. I mean, if that's doing it for you, great. But most of my clients we've been exposed to gym culture. We all know we're supposed to be doing this. 80% of people in North America don't even have gym memberships. And of those who do, only about 20% even go. So that means we have more people hearing that advice than actually doing that advice. So what's that gap 100%. About? How can we actually close that gap so that we can actually process that stress through our body?
Right. So that sounds like a perfect segue into I think the real underlying topic for today is, how do you help people find the joy in integrating exercise and body and whole body motion into their lives?
That's a really good question. So number one is tying it back into what else they actually love doing. And that sounds really, really basic, but if we think about, I give this analogy to a lot of clients. We think about buying a car. We know when we buy that car that we're going to like driving it, or we're going to find practical use in it, etc. But we know the second we buy that car that we have maintenance to do on that car. We're going to have to wash the car. We have to change the oil in the car. We have to do things to maintain the car. Otherwise, the car breaks down, and then we're not going to get the joy out of that car. Same thing goes for homes. Same thing goes for basically anything and everything we buy. Nobody told us that when we got a body.
Right.
So we often think of exercise. Oh, my son made me this cute little sign.
There we go. Perfect. Yes. What's your son's name?
So we often classify exercise, especially as adults, as this completely separate activity, something that we do to look good or to focus on aesthetics. We often don't really think of that maintenance piece. What does tend to jazz us up is the hobbies and interests that we want to do. So it's thinking about the trip we want to take in the car. It's thinking about how much we love just being in the car or taking the top down. So the first thing I always do is find out why someone is there. What do they want to do in their life? Because that helps keep our eye on why we're doing this body maintenance. And I do always give this analogy of the car because people get that it's actually a responsibility. So we're adults. We're going to have to be responsible for this. It's not going to just suddenly, take care of itself. And then from there, once we kind of get that buy-in of, okay, I can do this once a week or twice a week or 6 times a week or whatever it is, then we start really peeling into what activities you enjoy. So I have a lot of different tools and techniques in my arsenal. Most of them are, they're not crazy to one side, but they're also not necessarily super standard. Like, we're not grabbing weights and doing squats. Again, I can, but I don't, because if that's what people found joyful, they would be at the gym, not in my studio.
Right.
So I will actually experiment with different types of movement. It could be yoga, it could be Pilates. I've got a body rolling technique called Yamana body rolling. We do these things and I'm watching the person's eyes. I'm looking at the results. I'm kind of helping them through what it is that they love. And I've had lots of clients that actually get to a certain point and they say, you know what? My body feels good. I'm gonna walk. That's what I love. I'm like, great, that's perfect. Or go cycle or what have you. So we have, it's through a combination of exploration and play and things that this person already knows. We all could probably think back to being 12. What did we love to do with the body? For some people, it's dancing. For me, it was riding my bike. Some people, it's walking or running or playing a sport. So we all have this within us. As adults, we've typically taken exercise and put it in this really rigid category. So it's showing people, talking through it, kind of going backwards in the mind, and then being open to trying new things that are maybe, for a lot of people, they actually don't like sweating. They don't like exerting. So here's some non-sweat things that you can do at home. We're going to simplify this. We're going to figure out how long you actually want to invest doing this. So it's like it's like being a teenager trying to find a hobby. Your parents probably put you in 5, 6, 7 different things, and you kind of were able to narrow it down a little bit more. Some of the stuff went away. Some of it you got a little deeper into.
I gotcha. Okay. I wonder if, just to help illustrate, because I can kind of see conceptually what you're speaking of as far as drawing someone from being exercise averse to being to loving exercise and really looking forward to that as a key part of their lives and something that they cherish and adore, instead of finding it revolting or something that you got to do, right? Could you maybe take us through a scenario of somebody who was unusually resistant, just anonymously, and how did you talk them into this new paradigm of exercise?
Yes, I'm going to use the most resistant person in my arsenal, my mom.
Okay.
My mom has never liked exercise. She didn't grow up in a family that valued exercise. In fact, her mom was really, really resistant to it, just a different generation. My mom doesn't like sweating. She doesn't enjoy exerting. So my mom has actually tried a number of the different techniques that I have, and many of them she didn't enjoy. And finally, I encouraged her to try a technique that I teach called yin yoga. It's all on the floor. There's no sweating. You come into a posture, you hold it for 5 minutes, and that is it. And she does it every day. She's one of the few students that I actually have that does it every day. So she's in her 70s. So for legitimately 70 years, she hated exercise. And now she does not miss a day. In fact, if I'm late posting, she's actually doing it digitally. If I'm late posting the video, I always know if there's a problem with the video. I know my mom is totally on it. And the reason that she's doing that, and the reason she found that joy in it, is because she feels better. She feels better. And her experience with it is just that joy and delight in, I didn't even know my body could feel this way. A few years ago, she had a surgical procedure and she had her shoulder replaced, and it really restricted her range of mobility. And she tells me almost every time she sees me in real life, now I can do this movement. Now I can reach around and put on my bra by myself. And these are things that had been removed from her life and were causing her to feel, I don't know, I guess she accepted it, but it wasn't ideal. And so she has found joy in being able to move with more ease and being able to put on her clothes and being able to not have her body hurt when she takes a walk with my dad. And it sounds so simple, because it is. We shouldn't have to convince ourselves that movement is fun. If you watch a child move, they're not hooked up to Fitbits and calorie counters and big clocks and They don't have to have a personal trainer standing beside them saying, and you got this, 3 more. They're just moving freely. And that's what I actually want for all my clients. That's all I want. So if we find less compressed movement, we're going to find that joy and passion in actual movement again. And it doesn't need to be formal, and we don't need to be talked into it.
I gotcha. So if I could ask you, that journey sounds awesome, and I'm glad your mom found the exercise that worked for her. Yes. Even it doesn't matter if it's static or dynamic, right? As long as it's creating the flow and the release and bringing the joy.
That's right. Perfect. And what always happens is when we can kind of remove that compression, we will move more, because when we're not, you take that hand, that's going to feel bad, especially after decades of just keeping it like that. So we're going to have more freedom and more flow, and we're going to take more walks, and we're going to garden more, and we're going to play with the grandkids more, etc. So it becomes a circle.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I could just ask as a kind of a final question, what was the turning point? I'm sure at first, even with finding the yin yoga, your mom was probably still resistant and still unsure if that was the solution for her. How did she reach the top of the mountain and work her way down and reach the joy that you were intending for her?
She's told me that at first she found it hard to focus, and she found it hard to really understand or hear what I was saying. And she found that it was, she had a bit of impatience with it, because especially that technique, you basically find a posture and marinate in it and don't move. And she just thought, well, okay, I've paid for a month. We're going to do this. And then she noticed after, the techniques that I teach are very effective in a very short window of time.
Excellent.
So for most clients, because I'm doing a personalized combo of what I think their body needs, I honestly, my private clients see results within 3 sessions, or we release them. I've only ever had one client in almost 15 years that it just wasn't an effective technique for. So, if you really take 3 hours of your life and make a commitment to try something, and you start feeling that result, 99% of people are like, wow, I'm continuing, right? Because we don't get that with most things in life.
Right. That's huge. And I think that's perhaps the biggest lesson. Find a solution that works, and then be willing to invest just 3 hours.
Right.
That's huge. It's not that much time if you think of it in the grand scheme of things. 3 hours to change the trajectory of your life and change your joyous, or your state from tense to joyous. That's completely.
And with my private clients, that's the only commitment that I require from them, is those first 3 sessions, because it is a more subtle process, and we have to be a little bit more attuned. And if we start noticing those shifts within 3 sessions, we are likely to, we'll have a tool for evaluation, whether it is for you or not for you. We have to kind of give it more than one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very cool, and very nice that your track record shows that folks find their path and they find their joy that way. That's awesome.
Yeah, I love what I do, because the body really is the center of everything. Of course, my bias is that way, but it's the pyramid upon which all else sits. Because if our body is in pain or we're sick, we all know what that feels like. If we're sick and we have to go to bed, we're not self-actualizing, we're not productive, we're not building relationships or financial health. We're literally taking care of that first. And secondarily, our body is the vessel through which everything else is experienced. Our 5 senses are literally here. So the disconnection from our body means that we're just not able to get that connection to the rest of our experience. So in my opinion, and again, I have a bias as a body worker, that's the base of the pyramid upon which all else rests. And if we're not kind of taking basic care of that piece, we can't build emotional health, phenomenal relationships, financial health. We can't self-actualize and grow, etc.
I doubt if there'd be anybody out there who would disagree with that, because body in pain is like sitting on an alarm clock all day long, right? So with that kind of pressure, of course, it is possible to transcend, but you can imagine the mental energy required to just ignore your own body like that and not leverage the techniques that you're offering to simply transition out of that into a more joyous movement state and then move on from there.
That's right. And I think often the other thing that we don't kind of share with people, it's like a meditation practice. We're not doing this for hours a day. Some people do, but we can improve our body and our connection to our body and those sensations in our body in as little as 14 minutes a day. That's kind of, I had some personal circumstances where I actually stopped exercising for a while, and that was my reentry path. I was like, I can commit to 14 minutes, and things started to change. So we don't need an hour. We don't need 2 hours. We start with what we have to give to it, and we will get improvements from that.
Just as a final closing comment, would you say that somebody who feels they're too busy to offer 14 minutes would still find results if they could offer, with your techniques, even just 2-3 minutes a day?
Yep.
Okay.
And part of the reason why is because we will either see change or we will not see change. If we don't see change, we ask for 5 minutes. We ask for 10 minutes. And, I'm a business owner. I have a son. I actually single parent him. And I kind of feel like if I can find, you wave, buddy.
There he is.
I have broken that up into little chunks of a few minutes at a time. So we often find, just like with meditation, we start with 2 or 3 minutes. Then when we start seeing those results and those changes, I'm like, well, maybe I can find 5 for this. Put down my Facebook. I'll find 5 minutes. But absolutely, if for the rest of your life you only had 3 minutes a day to do one exercise, yes, absolutely, you're going to get some benefit out of that.
Perfect. And of course, once you see the benefits, then it's easy to tack on another minute, and eventually you reach your 14, and then you're golden, right? You're in the.
That's right.
Yeah, that's perfect. Cool. Well, Janice, it's been such a pleasure having you on here, and appreciate all the insights and your son's debut as well.
Thank you. Yes. Well, oh, whoops, that's backwards. Yeah, we'll give this another. He's changed the sign on me.
Okay. All right, Mel. Okay. Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure having you on, and let me share your contact information for those in the audience that might wish to reach out to you and learn more about your system. And your website is at mybodycouture.com, and if you're spelling challenged in any way, which I can certainly see if I'm just going through this quickly, it's mybodycouture.com, mybodycouture.com.
Yes, couture means customized, so that's an easy way to remember that.
Excellent. Janice, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And for the Center of Calmness, I'm DK Warner.